Yep, we should be recording, Eric. Ready to go.
All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining the Focus Investment Partnerships solicitation webinar for the 21-23 biennium. We have scheduled an hour and a half today. The webinar portion, the presentation portion, won't take that long, but we wanted to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. And you can see the folks involved in putting this together today on this screen. Not all are present. Andrew and I are here from OWEB. Andrew Dutter is the partnerships coordinator and leads the FIP program. And I'm Eric Williams, the grant program manager at OWEB. Also for technical help, we've got Liz Red on staff as well. All right, for orientation to the webinar, many of you by now are used to the Zoom mode here. Because this is a webinar format and we're recording it for future use, we have to do the Q&A through the chat box. And so feel free to use the chat at any time during the presentation today to post your questions. And we will have the Q&A session at the end and respond to those questions that we see in the chat box. You can also refer to the FIP webpage on the OWEB website for information and solicitation materials. We'll be referencing the application and consultations and various aspects of the solicitation as we go through the webinar today. As a little bit of background, in 2013, OWEB's board adopted a long-term investment strategy. And the plan behind that strategy was to support the Oregon Plan for Salmon and Watersheds, and it included 4 components. One is operating capacity grants that many of you are familiar with that provide operating costs for watershed councils and soil and water conservation districts. Our open solicitation grant program, which offers responsive grants across the state for competitive proposals based on local ecological priorities. The third one highlighted there is the subject of today's webinar, the Focused Investment Partnership Program, which is designed to help collaborative partnerships achieve prioritized ecological outcomes at a landscape scale. And the final component of the long-term investment strategy is the monitoring program to evaluate and report on progress and outcomes of habitat restoration that OWEB supports. Recently, last month, the board adopted our spending plan for the biennium. And this chart shows a breakdown of how the board is strategizing for its investments during the 21-23 biennium. And as you can see here, the majority of our funds come through the open solicitation program that many of you are familiar with. And then the Focus Investment Partnership Initiative is between 22 and 23% of our grant making. And you can see capacity is about 13.5%, with other grants comprising the remaining 3%. For the 21-23 FIP solicitation, the spending plan has $10 million available. This is the same level of funding that we included in the solicitation that we had started but had to pause due to reduced lottery revenue as a result of shutdown in lottery from the pandemic. The board has signaled an interest in the past and continues to do so in funding FIPs at an average of $2 million per biennium, but you can apply for a maximum of up to $4 million per biennium. Of the 11 FIPs funded so far, they've averaged about $2.5 million per biennium. So we expect that the $10 million for this solicitation would support between 3 and 5 new FIP partnerships. By definition, the program supports collaborative partnerships in implementing restoration initiatives at the landscape or watershed scale. You can see here the 4 goals of the FIP program: addressing board identified priorities of significance, which we'll describe in a few minutes. Achieving clear and measurable ecological outcomes. This is really the crux of that long-term investment strategy that the board was focused on in designing this program. And using integrated and results-oriented approaches that are identified in a strategic action plan. And as most of you know, we have a required outline for those plans, and a plan must be completed and adopted by the partnership prior to applying. The 4th goal there is that the Focus Investment Partnership Initiative is implemented by quote, high-performing partnership. And as mentioned earlier, you can apply for up to $4 million per biennium. A FIPP initiative is for a period of 6 years. And so the total for a 6-year FIPP is not to exceed $12 million. And I just note here that because our funding is approved biennium by biennium, the board signals an intent to fund 6 years of a FIPP initiative through this solicitation. However, the awards will actually be made 2 years at a time through each biennial spending plan. And I'll also note that we have adopted administrative rules for this program and the solicitation. Those were adopted in 2018 and they're on OWEB's website. They do include application evaluation criteria, which we'll be discussing today, and other information about the program. It's also important to note that OWEB has a related grant program called Partnership Technical Assistance. It was in the past coupled with the FIPP program, but it's no longer coupled with the FIPP program. So applicants for that don't need to be working in board identified priority areas. And that Partnership Technical Assistance offering has 2 tracks, one called Partnership Development and one called Partnership Capacity. And the intent of those funds is to help partnerships write or update their strategic action plans, to build or improve their governance document, to build capacity among the partnerships and support them in implementing their SAPs. Under that Partnership Technical Assistance program, funding can be obtained for up to 3 years and up to a maximum of $150,000. And we're noting this today because we do currently have a solicitation open in Partnership Technical Assistance with applications due on October 14th. And those awards will be made by the board in January 2022. I'll also note that partnerships that go through the Partnership TA program are not guaranteed to receive FIPP funding in the future. And also note that partnerships do not have to go through the Partnership TA program in order to apply for the FIPP funding, which is the subject of today's webinar. And here you can see the board's identified FIPP priorities. The board approved this set of priorities in spring of 2015 based on input from the conservation community across Oregon. These priorities are closely linked to federal recovery, state conservation, and tribal plans. And this is incorporated into our rules that our board will review these priorities at least every 5 years. And they did so most recently in January of 2020, maintaining the same list of initial FIPP priorities, but adding some specificity to a couple of them. And so if you're applying for a FIPP initiative, you must address one of these board identified priorities. And there's a memo describing them as well as a map for each priority on OWEB's website. You'll also find on the website diagrams that look like this, that are theory of change diagrams that are basically intended to help understand how within these ecological priority types, you would connect restoration strategies, which are at the bottom, up to the ecological outcomes at the top. And of course, these would be tailored for your FIPP and your strategic action plan to address the specific needs in your geography. They may also help some partnerships thinking on the priorities and provide information for framing responses to the related questions in the FIPP application. Here you can see an example of a map of one of the ecological priority types. This is for aquatic habitat for native fish species. This was updated in 2020, as I referenced earlier. And in this priority, the map shows via colors high, medium, and low priorities for aquatic habitat for native fish species. And for that priority, geographies that are in green or yellow are eligible for FIPP funding. Each of those priority maps have different ways of designating eligible areas. Some are shown in maps, some have habitat and species distribution that show the extent of the geography for which that priority is eligible. And if you do have questions on any of those maps under the ecological priorities, please do touch base with us and we can walk through that with you. And next, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to get into some of the details of the FIPP program.
Yeah, thanks very much, Eric. And hello, everyone. Again, Andrew Dutter, Partnerships Coordinator with OWEB. Nice to speak with you all today. And as Eric indicated, we'll take a closer look at some of the key concepts with a FIP initiative, and to also take a look at how a FIP initiative works once a partnership has been funded. So starting with the definition of a high-performing partnership in OWEB's terms. It's defined in rules as a collaborating group of organizations with an existing governance structure that includes a formal decision-making process resulting in an effective performance history. So a few notes there. With the FIP applications, OWEB requires that partnerships submit governance documents for the partnership. These documents typically will outline the partnership's decision-making processes and how the partnership prioritizes projects. There could be other organizational structural components in those documents as well. And it's worth noting that when OWEB reviews these FIP initiative applications, we actually have two separate types of review. One is focused on the partnership and how it is organized and the composition of the partnership, performance history, things of that nature. In fact, it's the same review team that looks at the partnership TA proposals. And then there's a second review that looks at the restoration aspects of a proposed initiative. So that the partnership piece is certainly very important in a FIP proposal. Another key term, strategic action plan. As you might imagine, this is the long-term conservation strategy of a partnership or that restoration blueprint. Typically, these cover a relatively broad geography, maybe an entire watershed or landscape. Often they're on a 10 to 30 year time frame. We've seen them as much as 50 years. And these, as Eric mentioned earlier, are required with the FIP application. We strongly recommend that partnerships look at OWEB's strategic action plan guidance. This is available on the FIP webpage. Partnerships can submit an action plan in any format, but the action plans must address the components in OWEB's guidance. Let's see, another term, the FIP initiative. So we've been using this quite a bit. So just to be clear in how we define this, this is the restoration program that the partnership will pursue with the FIP funding. And so when we think about a strategic action plan, the initiative could be all of that action plan, but more likely and most commonly, it's just a portion of that action plan in terms of the geography and restoration actions that the partnership feels that it can accomplish within the 6 years of the proposed initiative. So it's just that bite of the action plan that the partnership will pursue with FIP funding. Also worth noting that FIP awards occur each biennium, as Eric stated earlier. So it's a 6-year commitment by the board, but awards are renewed every 2 years or each biennium. And those awards they stay with OWEB in what we call a holding account. And awarded partnerships as FIPs will submit project level grant applications to OWEB that will go through technical review. And that is essentially our vehicle for allocating the biennial award to individual projects on the ground. And it's also OWEB's means for ensuring technical soundness for each project. So the technical review is required in rules and something that OWEB does for every grant that goes out the door. And we'll take a closer look at that here in a little bit. And then lastly, a work plan. If you haven't seen this, there's a section in the initiative application specific to the work plan. So this is the outline of the actions or projects that the partnership would pursue under the FIP initiative each biennium. And so we ask that you submit a work plan for your first biennium of proposed work. and then awarded FIPs will submit a new work plan each biennium through the duration of the initiative. And next slide, Eric. So this map shows the current FIPs around the state, including 2 that are now complete, meaning that they've obligated all of their FIP funding. And you can see that they cover diverse landscapes and habitats and species around the state. Thus far, OEB has funded FIPs in 4 of the 7 board identified priority areas that Eric covered earlier. OEB has not yet funded in coho, estuaries, or oak priorities. Most have occurred in aquatic habitat for native fish, but that's also the only priority that covers the entire state, and it is the broadest in terms of eligible species and habitats. I guess I'd also note that this cycle that is currently open is now the 3rd FIP solicitation that OEB has offered. Next slide, Eric. So drilling down a little bit deeper, how does a FIP work? So when a FIP is funded, OEB will organize what we call a kickoff meeting, and we'll cover some of the preparations with each partnership. The FIPs will be assigned an OEB staff person as a FIP coordinator. And we will draft with each newly awarded partnership a partnership agreement, which is essentially an MOU with OEB that outlines how we'll manage the FIP initiative. Again, just reemphasizing, individual FIP projects do require technical review and evaluation. So each partnership will submit projects through the course of each biennium on OEB's standard grant application forms, restoration, technical assistance, monitoring, etc. OEB staff, your FIP coordinator, and the partnership will determine the timing of those application cycles and the site visits, and we'll schedule review meetings together collaboratively to help the partners meet project needs on the ground. So we want to be flexible in terms of our timing, such that we can customize those cycles for each partnership and the unique type of restoration work that you're pursuing. OEB will also work with the partnerships to develop the technical review teams. So in terms of the membership, we want to make sure that the partners feel that you have the right expertise and external partners that are best suited to be involved in those discussions. OEB will coordinate and manage those teams, but we certainly do so in conjunction with each FIP. And so at this stage, again, these project level reviews, it's not done on a competitive basis. So the partnership has been awarded the FIP funding for the biennium, but instead these reviews will focus on ensuring technical soundness of each project, looking at the alignment with the partnership's strategic action plan and proposed initiative. It will look at each application as the scope of services for that project, so ensuring clarity and completeness of the applications. And then really also in the spirit of third-party peer review, helping both OEB and the partners, making sure that we're all getting the best possible projects on the ground. So with all that in mind, I think it's important to note that in FIP, technical reviews are done with the FIP partners and the technical review team members in the same room in a collaborative setting. Another point of emphasis with these reviews is the revision process is very critical. So when we go through a project level technical review, we'll compile application revisions or project modifications that the partners would need to make. And then the OEB staff person, your FIP coordinator, will work with the partners following the meeting to make those revisions. So to be clear, these FIP grants are not a block grant. We do have the partnerships apply for specific projects individually, and those projects applications go through through a technical review. Next slide, Eric. So if we look at some of the monitoring and reporting in FIPP, you'll see in the OEB Strategic Action Plan guidance document, if you haven't already, that OEB does have an expectation that partnerships applying for FIPP funding have developed a theory of change with a progress monitoring framework as part of their strategic action plan. So this is the means for the partnership to identify restoration outputs and ecological outcomes over the long term that the partnership can then plan their monitoring and measuring of progress, and also to help inform adaptive management processes. So the strongest proposals that come in will have a results chain and this progress monitoring framework, and that will serve as the basis for a clearly articulated programmatic monitoring approach. And OEB staff will work with awarded FIPPs to fine-tune that monitoring approach and tracking progress of the initiative over time. So the progress monitoring framework then also becomes the context or the sort of the backdrop for the biennial reporting that each FIPP will do to the board. And so we do that near the conclusion of each biennium in anticipation of the next biennium's funding award. And a couple of thoughts on budgeting for monitoring. First, be mindful of those OEB reporting requirements. It involves in-person presentation at a board meeting each biennium, as well as involvement with developing the progress reports. So that time and resources for each partnership for those efforts typically are covered in the partnership capacity category that you'll see in the application budget tables. OEB also encourages all the partnerships that are applying to really think about a robust monitoring plan and how you'll go about implementing that for your initiative, and to make sure that you're budgeting funding and requesting funding and budgeting accordingly. Sometimes there's a feeling that you have to put a lot of dollars into restoration, but we do encourage you to think about having a well-rounded initiative and proposal and budgeting for monitoring accordingly. I would also call your attention to two new documents that OEB has available to assist in your planning around monitoring and adaptive management. You'll see those linked in the application. One is titled Adaptively Managing Restoration Initiatives. That was developed by OEB with some assistance from our partners about 2 years ago. And then most recently, we have a guidance document titled Monitoring Restoration Initiatives that should help provide some guidance on linking your theory of change, your results chain, to monitoring actions on the ground. So both worth taking a look as you go through the application process. Next slide, Eric. So I'll cover some common questions that come up typically, both when we have an application cycle underway and also through the course of initiatives. And then I'll turn back to Eric to speak to some of the application evaluation criteria. So first, probably one of the most common questions comes up around overlap between the FIPP program and other OEB programs. And most specifically, what does it mean for eligibility in open solicitation if there's a FIPP in your project area? And so the answer to this is that, and as defined in FIPP rules, projects in the defined geography of the FIPP initiative and focused on the same restoration actions outlined in the FIPP are not eligible for open solicitation. And this rule applies to both FIPP partners and non-partner entities. And there's two fundamental reasons One is to essentially prevent FIP partners from applying to both OEB programs within their FIP geography for the same actions. And then the second is that when OEB funds a FIP, we are essentially delegating the work of prioritizing projects in that area for those restoration actions to the partners working on the ground who are going through that process as a partnership. And so if there's a project that comes in from outside the partnership,